On April 3, 2022, Miami police were called to a luxury high-rise apartment in the upscale Edgewater neighborhood. Inside the 22nd-story condo, they found a scene straight out of a nightmare. Courtney Clenny, a social media influencer and OnlyFans model, was kneeling on the blood-soaked floor, cradling her boyfriend, Christian Abumsali. His lifeless body lay limp in her arms as she sobbed uncontrollably, pleading, "Baby, baby, wake up." But Christian couldn't wake up. He was gone. Courtney, her designer sweatpants drenched in Christian's blood, was detained on the apartment balcony as paramedics worked frantically to save his life. She told officers the stabbing was an accident, self-defense, she claimed. She said Christian had thrown her to the ground, so she grabbed a kitchen knife and threw it at him from across the room. But as investigators pieced together the evidence, her story began to crumble. The medical examiner ruled Christian's death a homicide, citing a fatal knife wound to his shoulder, 3 inches deep, delivered with a forceful, downward thrust. A trajectory that was impossible to achieve from a thrown knife. And that was just the beginning. Text messages, videos, and years of alleged abuse would soon come to light, painting a harrowing picture of a toxic relationship spiraling out of control. Asterisk, was this a desperate act of self-defense by a woman fearing for her life, or the culmination of months of violence by someone who couldn't control their rage? What led this seemingly glamorous couple from the high life to a tragic death in a $10,000 a month Miami apartment? This is the story of Courtney Clenny and Christian Abumsali, a tale of love, obsession, and a chilling question that haunts everyone involved. Is love going to kill me? We'll dive deep into the chilling text messages, the haunting videos, and the fatal injury that doesn't add up. A tragic story that leaves us all wondering, who was the real victim? Courtney Clenny was a name that millions of people knew, but only through a carefully curated lens. At 25 years old, she had built a glamorous career as an OnlyFans model and social media influencer, amassing a huge online following. Her fans saw the lavish trips, the designer clothes, and the picture-perfect life in luxury apartments, but those closest to her saw a very different side. Friends and former partners described Courtney as someone who could be bubbly and outgoing one moment and unpredictable, even volatile, the next. Behind the perfectly filtered images was a woman who, according to some accounts, struggled with intense mood swings and a fiery temper that could turn dangerous. Then there was Christian Abumsali. At 27, Christian was the youngest in a tight-knit Nigerian-American family from Texas. He was the baby of the family, a role he embraced with an easygoing personality and a love for his siblings. Christian was ambitious and driven. He worked in cryptocurrency, dreaming of financial success to provide for his family. His friends described him as quiet, soft-spoken, and deeply loyal to the people he cared about. When Christian met Courtney in 2020, he fell hard and fast. Friends said he was mesmerized by her beauty and drawn to her confidence. But that loyalty, they say, may have kept him in a relationship that was slowly consuming him. Their relationship began like a whirlwind, with the couple quickly becoming inseparable. Courtney's work as an OnlyFans creator often took her to glamorous destinations for content shoots, and Christian was always by her side. On social media, they looked like the picture of happiness, jet-setting between Miami, Los Angeles, and Palm Springs, attending parties, and living a life that seemed out of reach for most. But behind the scenes, things were far from perfect. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers began noticing the cracks in their relationship. The couple's fights were loud and frequent, with shouting matches that could be heard through walls or in hotel hallways. In one particularly explosive incident, while living in Austin, a neighbor claimed a fight got so bad that a painting was thrown off their 10th floor balcony. When they moved to Miami in early 2022, the fights didn't stop. Neighbors at the One Paraíso condominium reported screaming matches so intense that building management considered evicting them. Still, the couple stayed together. For Christian, staying may have come from hope or fear, or maybe both. In February 2022, just weeks before his death, he sent Courtney a chilling text message. He wrote, "Is love going to kill me?" In another message, he detailed instances where he said he had been spat on, slapped, stabbed, and insulted. Despite everything, Christian stayed. He told friends that he loved Courtney and believed things would get better. But those closest to him now wonder if he stayed because he was afraid of what might happen if he left. Courtney, too, seemed to recognize the toxicity in their relationship but didn't, or couldn't, walk away. Friends said that Courtney's personality would change after nights of partying or drinking. In those moments, Christian was often the one to de-escalate fights or manage her outbursts. But as the relationship wore on, it became harder and harder to tell who was in control. Was Courtney lashing out because she was being pushed, or was Christian quietly enduring something far darker than anyone realized? It's a question that now lies at the heart of this case. What no one disputes is that their love was turbulent, passionate, and ultimately destructive. As their fights escalated, so did the danger. Text messages, police reports, and witness accounts would later reveal a pattern of escalating violence, one that seemed destined to end in tragedy. The beautiful images of a perfect couple traveling the world and living the high life masked a reality of constant conflict, mistrust, and fear. In the weeks before April 3, 2022, it seemed like things were coming to a boiling point. Courtney told friends she was thinking of ending the relationship, and police were called to their apartment just a day before the stabbing. Courtney told officers she wanted Christian out of the condo and claimed he wouldn't leave. Police said there was nothing they could do. Christian was a legal resident of the apartment, and no crime had been committed. That was the last time anyone intervened. Less than 24 hours later, Christian Abumsali was dead. On the night of April 2, 2022, police were called to the One Paraíso condominium in Miami. Neighbors reported shouting and loud disturbances coming from the 22nd floor apartment of Courtney Clenny and Christian Abumsali. When officers arrived, Courtney, her hands and clothes stained with blood, was sobbing uncontrollably. "Baby, baby, wake up. Please, baby, wake up," she screamed. Christian, lying motionless beneath her, had a stab wound to his shoulder, one that went 3 inches deep and severed a major artery. The floor around them was covered in blood, and Courtney's face and chest were streaked with it as she held his head in her hands. Paramedics rushed into the room, performing CPR and desperately trying to save Christian's life. As they worked, Courtney was escorted out to the apartment's balcony. There, she sat in silence, still covered in Christian's blood. According to police body cam footage, she seemed detached, as though the gravity of what had just happened hadn't fully hit her. She told officers she had been defending herself during an argument. During questioning, Courtney claimed that Christian had pushed her and thrown her to the ground during a fight. In response, she said she grabbed a kitchen knife and threw it at him from across the room, approximately 10 feet away. It was an act, she said, born out of fear and self-defense. But as investigators began examining the evidence, her story quickly unraveled. The medical examiner determined that the fatal wound was caused by a forceful, downward thrust, a movement inconsistent with a knife being thrown. The trajectory of the wound suggested that Christian had been stabbed at close range, not from across the room. The depth of the injury, 3 inches, pierced an artery, causing him to bleed out in minutes. Investigators began to question whether this was truly self-defense or something far more deliberate. Christian's family, upon hearing the news, was devastated. They had no idea what had transpired inside the apartment that day, but they knew one thing for sure. Christian had expressed fear for his safety in the weeks leading up to his death. In one text message, he wrote about being slapped, spat on, and even stabbed in the past. He questioned whether love was worth enduring such pain. Now, those words haunted his family. Forensics teams scoured the apartment, taking photographs of the blood-spattered floors and collecting evidence. Neighbors were interviewed, with some reporting that they had heard screaming earlier in the day. One neighbor claimed to have heard a loud thud, followed by silence, shortly before police arrived. As more details emerged, the picture of what happened in the moments leading up to Christian's death became even more complicated. Courtney was taken into custody for questioning, and despite the evidence, she maintained her claim of self-defense. But investigators weren't convinced. The autopsy report, the trajectory of the knife wound, and the couple's history of violent altercations all pointed to something far more troubling than a split-second act of fear. Christian Abumsali was dead, and the question now was whether his death was a tragic accident or the result of a dangerous escalation in a volatile relationship. The answers wouldn't come easily, but as investigators dug deeper into the couple's past, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of conflict, one that would ultimately lead to Courtney's arrest. After the chaotic crime scene was cleared and the initial shock of Christian Abumsali's death began to sink in, investigators turned their focus to uncovering the truth of what happened that afternoon in the 22nd-story Miami apartment. Courtney Clenny had told them the stabbing was an act of self-defense, but the evidence quickly started to tell a different story, one that raised serious questions about her version of events. The Miami-Dade medical examiner was one of the first to cast doubt on Courtney's claims. The autopsy report revealed that Christian had died from a fatal knife wound to his shoulder. The blade had punctured 3 inches deep, severing the subclavian artery, which caused him to bleed out rapidly. The trajectory of the wound was described as forceful and downward, a movement that simply could not have been caused by a knife thrown from across the room. This single detail, the angle and depth of the stab wound, was enough to contradict Courtney's explanation entirely. But the autopsy findings were just the beginning. As investigators dug deeper into the couple's relationship, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of violence and abuse. Text messages between Christian and Courtney painted a harrowing picture of what life had been like behind closed doors. In one heartbreaking exchange, Christian wrote, "I've been slapped, spat on, and stabbed," describing how he had endured physical and emotional harm in the relationship. And then there was the chilling question he posed in another message, "Is love going to kill me?" It was a cry for help that no one seemed to hear in time. Christian wasn't just documenting his pain in words. He had also started recording videos during their most heated arguments. In these recordings, Courtney could be seen and heard yelling, cursing, and striking him. At times, Christian remained calm, trying to de-escalate the situation, while Courtney's anger seemed to spiral. These videos provided a first-hand glimpse into the volatile nature of their relationship, and they left little room for doubt that Christian had been subjected to repeated aggression. Yet, Courtney's legal team would later argue that she had been the true victim, living in fear for her safety. Investigators also began to examine what happened after Christian's death, and their focus soon turned to Courtney's parents, Kim and Deborah Clenny. In the weeks following the fatal stabbing, they were accused of tampering with evidence, specifically, Christian's laptop. According to the arrest affidavits, Courtney had allegedly handed over the laptop to her parents before her arrest. Investigators believe that her father accessed the device, using a PIN to unlock it, and later transported it to one of Courtney's attorneys. Text messages obtained from the family's group chat suggested that the laptop's contents were being reviewed, with one message reading, "Hold off going through the computer, please. I don't want to turn you into a witness just yet." This activity raised serious legal and ethical questions, and it ultimately led to charges of unauthorized computer access against Courtney and her parents. These allegations of tampering only added more layers to an already complex and emotionally charged case. Prosecutors argued that the family's actions showed a deliberate effort to hide or manipulate evidence, while Courtney's defense team insisted that the charges were baseless and that her parents were simply trying to protect their daughter. The more investigators uncovered, the more troubling the picture became. There were neighbors who reported hearing loud, violent arguments coming from the couple's apartment in the weeks and months leading up to Christian's death. One neighbor told police they had seen Courtney physically hit Christian on multiple occasions. And then there were the police records, documenting previous calls to their apartment for domestic disturbances. Each piece of evidence seemed to reinforce the idea that this relationship had been volatile, toxic, and dangerous for a long time. As these details came to light, they raised pressing questions about what really happened in that apartment on April 3, 2022. Was Courtney a woman acting in self-defense after years of abuse? Or was she the aggressor, pushing a man to his breaking point and then delivering the final blow? The evidence was conflicting, and both sides of the case seemed to carry heavy emotional weight. And yet, even as the investigation continued, one thing became heartbreakingly clear. Christian Abumsali had expressed fear for his life in his own words. In text messages and conversations with friends, he had spoken about the pain he was enduring in the relationship, and his family had no idea how dire the situation had become. For them, the tragedy wasn't just in losing their youngest son, it was in realizing how much he had suffered in silence. As prosecutors prepared their case against Courtney Clenny, they would rely on the evidence left behind, texts, videos, the autopsy findings, and witness testimony, to piece together a narrative of what happened in the lead-up to Christian's death. But as is often the case with stories like this, the truth would depend on which side you believed. And for Christian's family, the truth was simple: their son was gone, and nothing could bring him back. It wasn't until 4 months after Christian Abumsali's death that Courtney Clenny was officially arrested. On August 10, 2022, police tracked her down to a rehabilitation facility in Hawaii, where she was reportedly seeking treatment for substance abuse and PTSD. It was there, far from the Miami high-rise where the stabbing had occurred, that she was charged with second-degree murder. The arrest marked a turning point, signaling that investigators believed they had enough evidence to prove that Christian's death was not the result of self-defense, as Courtney had claimed. Courtney pleaded not guilty to the charge, maintaining her claim that she had acted in a moment of fear during a dangerous altercation. Her legal team painted a picture of a young woman trapped in a toxic relationship, enduring abuse at the hands of Christian. According to her defense attorneys, the April 3rd incident was the tragic result of a cycle of violence that escalated out of control. They argued that Courtney had been defending herself against a man who was bigger, stronger, and capable of causing her serious harm. To support their case, they pointed to Courtney's own injuries, claiming they were consistent with her account of being pushed and thrown to the ground during the fight. But prosecutors presented a very different version of events. They argued that the evidence, both physical and digital, told a story of escalating aggression from Courtney toward Christian, not the other way around. They highlighted the autopsy findings, which showed a fatal knife wound delivered with a forceful downward thrust, directly contradicting Courtney's claim that she had thrown the knife from a distance. They also relied heavily on text messages and video recordings made by Christian in the months leading up to his death. In one video, Courtney could be seen screaming and striking Christian during an argument, while he remained calm, trying to de-escalate the situation. And in text messages, Christian described instances where he had been physically harmed, writing, "I've been spat on and stabbed." These details, prosecutors said, painted a clear picture of who the aggressor was in the relationship. The trial has been anything but straightforward. From the start, it has faced repeated delays and controversies. One of the most contentious issues arose when prosecutors accessed private communications between Courtney, her parents, and her legal team. These communications, which reportedly included discussions about Christian's laptop and potential defense strategies, were seized as part of an investigation into tampering allegations against Courtney's parents. Defense attorneys argued that the seizure violated attorney-client privilege and demanded that the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office be removed from the case. The controversy created a firestorm, with both sides accusing each other of overreach and misconduct. Beyond the legal wrangling, the trial has stirred deep emotions for both families. For Christian's family, it has been a long and painful journey to seek justice for their son. They firmly believe that Christian was the victim of domestic violence and that Courtney's actions were far from self-defense. For Courtney's family, it has been a battle to defend their daughter's character and convince the court, and the public, that she acted out of fear for her life. The tension between these two narratives has made the case one of the most polarizing in recent memory, with public opinion divided sharply along the lines of who they see as the victim. As the trial continues, the stakes couldn't be higher. Courtney Clenny faces a possible life sentence if convicted, and the weight of the evidence will ultimately decide her fate. But for the Abumsali family, no outcome in court can undo the loss they've suffered. Christian, the youngest member of their family, is gone, and the pain of his absence will never fade. With every new development in this case, one question remains at the heart of it all. Was this a tragic act of self-defense, or the culmination of a pattern of violence that ended in tragedy? As the trial unfolds, the world watches, waiting for answers. The days following Christian Abumsali's death were filled with shock, disbelief, and a grief so deep it consumed his family. Christian was the youngest in a close-knit Nigerian-American household. A son, a brother, and a beacon of hope for his loved ones. His older brother, Jeffrey, spoke for the family when he said, "We've had no experience with domestic violence. We never imagined losing him this way." For them, the tragedy was incomprehensible. They couldn't reconcile the image of their soft-spoken, loyal Christian with the horrific scene that unfolded in that Miami apartment. Christian's family struggled not only with the pain of losing him but with the unanswered questions surrounding his death. They were blindsided by the news, learning of his passing not from police, but from a medical examiner who called to ask if his organs could be donated. In the chaos of those early moments, they desperately tried to reach Christian, calling his phone, texting him, and even trying to contact Courtney. Their calls went unanswered. And as more details emerged about the events leading up to his death, their grief turned into a quest for justice. For Christian's mother, the pain is immeasurable. The thought of her youngest son, the baby of the family, dying in such a violent way is something no parent should ever have to endure. His cousin, Karen Egbuna, described the family's heartbreak, saying, "He had so much life left to live. He was supposed to grow old with us, not leave us like this." Their grief is made worse by the knowledge that Christian had confided in those close to him about the abuse he was experiencing. They now wonder, could something have been done to save him? But Christian's death has also sparked broader conversations about intimate partner violence and the complexities of abusive relationships. The case forces us to confront uncomfortable realities, how society views male victims of domestic abuse and the double standards that exist when it comes to gender roles in violent relationships. Text messages and videos suggest Christian endured physical and emotional harm during his time with Courtney. Yet, the narrative of who is the aggressor and who is the victim remains deeply contested. In a world where public perception is shaped by social media and fame, Courtney's glamorous online persona has influenced opinions, with some people quick to defend her while others vilify her. It's a divide that raises larger questions about how we judge cases like these. This case has also highlighted the pressures and toxicity that can exist beneath the surface of seemingly perfect relationships. On social media, Courtney and Christian appeared to have it all: money, luxury, and the kind of lifestyle that millions of people dream of. But as their story shows, what's presented to the world is often far from reality. Their relationship was marked by control, arguments, and a cycle of harm that ended in tragedy. For advocates of domestic violence awareness, this case serves as a painful reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing red flags before it's too late. As the trial looms, unresolved questions still hang over this case like a heavy cloud. Was Christian's death truly an act of self-defense, as Courtney claims? Or was it the culmination of a toxic relationship spiraling out of control? And what could have been done to prevent it? These are questions that haunt Christian's family as they fight to honor his memory and seek accountability for his death. For now, the loss of Christian Abumsali remains a wound that time cannot heal. His family holds onto their memories of him, his smile, his kindness, and the future he never got to live. And for those watching this case unfold, it's a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked violence, the fragility of life, and the ripple effects of one fateful moment. As we close this story, I want to hear from you. This case, this moment in time, has left us all questioning what really happened behind closed doors. Was it an act of self-defense, an instinctive response to danger? Or was it something more, something darker, with Christian ultimately being the true victim in a story of betrayal and loss? What do you think really went down that night in that Miami apartment? The pieces are there, scattered and incomplete, but the truth lies within them. So, take a moment. Reflect. Let me know your thoughts. Was this a tragic accident, or something far more calculated? Your voice matters in this conversation. Dive into the comments below. Share your theories, your suspicions, or maybe even your doubts. I want to know how you see it because we're all in this together, trying to understand the puzzle pieces that just don't quite fit. And if you found yourself hooked on this story, on the twists, the emotions, the unanswered questions, well, this is just the beginning. Don't miss out on what's coming next. Hit that like button, subscribe, and make sure you ring the bell so you never miss an update. Because the truth doesn't stop here. It keeps unraveling, and we're following it every step of the way. So, before we go, think about it one last time. Who was really the victim? The truth is out there. Let's find it together.